In 2006, the John Birch Society produced a program entitled Immigration Invasion. Since then, the immigration problem hasn't gone away, and there are several new considerations showing how dangerous to our country it truly is. Illegal entrants continue to cross the border into America, but the economic downturn has impacted the number, and several states that have had minor success dealing with the problem have slightly cut into the number already here and into the number continuing to cross our border. But new attempts to deal with the illegal immigration problem by granting amnesty to millions continue to surface. We take a look at these developments as we update what we stated in 2006. To begin, I want to stress the importance of a document that every American knows exists. It's called the Constitution of the United States. Every politician, of course, swears to abide by it, and every citizen should be familiar with it. The first thing to know about the Constitution is that it limits the government, not the people. Toward the end of the Constitution, we find a very important requirement in Article 4, Section 4. It says, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this Union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion." Let me stress that. The United States shall protect each of them, the states, against invasion. Right now, there are somewhere between 11 and 20 million illegal aliens within our borders. Many have entered by crossing the border separating our nation from Mexico. If this isn't an invasion, what is it? Proponents of this mass movement of humans have certainly called it an invasion. Mexican commentator Carlos Loret de Mola celebrated this drastic demographic change in an article for Mexico's Excelsior magazine as far back as 1982. His article carried the title, "The Great Invasion, Mexico Recovers Its Own." Loret de Mola wrote, "A peaceful mass of people carries out slowly and patiently an unstoppable invasion, the most important in human history. It seems to be slowly returning the southwestern United States to the jurisdiction of Mexico without the firing of a single shot by means of a steady, spontaneous, and uninterrupted occupation." When these words were penned by Loret de Mola in 1982, illegal immigration from Mexico to our country was a mere trickle compared to the flood of illegal immigrants now pouring into the United States. The Constitution didn't specify that the states should be protected only against a military invasion. It directed the government of the United States to protect against invasion. And upwards of 11 million illegal entrants constitutes an invasion. The Mexican government has encouraged immigration to the United States, even publishing a how-to comic book that instructs poor and disadvantaged Mexicans the way to accomplish crossing into the United States. Once here, many of these illegal immigrants become propagandized into believing that several Western states referred to as Aztlan should be turned over to Mexico. During the 2001-2009 Bush administration, several proposals calling for comprehensive immigration reform were considered by Congress. Whenever the word comprehensive is used in an immigration bill, it should be understood to mean amnesty. But the amnesty proposal offered in 2006 failed. Another similar measure introduced in 2007 by Senators McCain and Kennedy had the strong backing of President Bush, but it also failed to gain passage. Grassroots Americans and several groups focusing on the immigration problem, especially on the drive for amnesty, prevailed. Barack Obama is now in the White House. During his campaign for the nation's highest office, Mr. Obama enthusiastically promised in a speech to the pro-amnesty group, National Council of La Raza, that he would use his position to promote comprehensive immigration reform. Again, comprehensive translates to amnesty. He told La Raza's cheering throng that he would bring those 12 million people out of the shadows, thereby acknowledging that there are indeed that many illegal entrants in our nation. Let me now introduce my colleague, William F. Jasper, senior editor of the biweekly magazine The New American, a John Birch Society affiliate. Mr. Jasper has investigated Mr. Obama's friends at the National Council of La Raza, and Mr. Jasper has also uncovered who funds La Raza.
We have now a huge number of activist organizations here in the United States who exist principally to stir up and agitate these new immigrant populations into anti-American activities, not to assimilate, but to create cadres within the American population that will constantly be agitating for more and more government programs, for more and more civic turmoil. The presidents of La Raza said a few years back, he said, we wouldn't have a Latino or Mexican-American movement in this country without the Ford Foundation. It was brought to the Ford Foundation's attention. Sometimes their trustees or presidents would say, oh, gee, we didn't know about that. We didn't realize this. But then when you see that they have people on the board of directors of the Ford Foundations who are actually participants, activists in these organizations, and that they are then continuing year after year, decade after decade to fund these organizations, then you have to be willfully blind to continue to attribute this to ignorance.
In late 2009 and early 2010, new comprehensive immigration reform bills were introduced in both the House and the Senate. Both bills immediately attracted a sizable number of co-sponsors. An even newer bill introduced in the Senate by Democrat Charles Schumer of New York and Republican Lindsey Graham of South Carolina is receiving significant attention. But a 2009 poll of 20,000 Americans taken by the respected Zogby firm showed that men and women in virtually all walks of life want enforcement of existing laws to solve the problem. They want the border protected. They want enforcement of laws prohibiting the hiring of illegal immigrants. And they don't want amnesty because they know that previous amnesties mandated by Congress led immediately to more border crossers. Almost all politicians, reporters, radio and television commentators, professors, and others customarily refer to the millions of invaders as undocumented workers, or guest workers, or job-seeking immigrants. But the reality is that the millions who have come here uninvited have thumbed their noses at our laws and entered the United States illegally. Their invasion has produced many serious consequences. The illegal immigrants have created enormous financial drains on states and communities where they have migrated, forced many hospitals out of business because of having to care for immigrants who have no funds. In Southern California alone, dozens of hospitals have closed their doors. Inundated the schools with their children and demanded that they receive instruction in their native language rather than in the language of our nation, English. They have also filled the prisons with their criminal element in highly impacted areas. 30% of federal prison inmates, the perpetrators of violent crimes, are illegal aliens. They have brought with them drugs and other contraband that harms Americans, formed criminal gangs and syndicates that terrorize various communities, refused to assimilate or even to aspire to gain citizenship. They have demanded the return to Mexico of several southwestern states, flown the flags of foreign nations, heaped scorn on the Stars and Stripes, and even produced their own Spanish-language version of the Star-Spangled Banner. They have accepted work at reduced scales with the result that pay scales for poorer Americans have been lowered, broken our laws against the manufacture and use of fraudulent visas, passports, and social security identification. They have cast illegal ballots and formed political blocs to support politicians who champion their cause. They have skirted tax laws while insisting on social services paid for by taxpayers. And they have forced the overworked and outmanned U.S. Border Patrol to create a new category of illegal entrants called OTMs, other than Mexicans. These are Arab speakers, Asians, Eastern Europeans, Latin Americans, and others. During the last 4 years, the serious consequences of mass immigration have become more obvious. Numerous state governments are near bankruptcy because of having to provide various benefits to the hordes who have broken into our country and thumbed their noses at our laws. Yet these law-breaking invaders delight in receiving welfare, housing, medical care, education for their children, and other benefits. Illegal immigrants have accepted work at lower pay scales, thereby lowering the wages that can be earned by citizens and legal immigrants who are awaiting citizenship. Added to this development is the severe economic downturn that has left millions of Americans unemployed. Yet, as immigration specialist Robert Rector has concluded, if current laws were enforced, there would be 10 million jobs for legal citizens. Because of our nation's recession, a small percentage of illegals have left our nation. Occasionally, the slight decrease in their number, less than 10%, has been pointed to as proof that the problem is being solved. This is absurd. There are still many millions in our country who should not be here. History shows that amnesty for illegal entrants only encourages more to illegally cross the border. An extensive survey taken in Mexico by the liberal Pew Hispanic Center showed that 40% of Mexico's citizens, that's almost 50 million people, would like to move to the United States. Are we willing to accept all of these people and more into our country? In 1986, Congress passed and the President signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act. It granted amnesty to 2.7 million illegal immigrants who are already here. The politicians who crafted this bill assured opponents that they had solved the immigration problem. They informed fellow legislators and the American people that there wouldn't be any more illegal crossings of the border. But just the opposite happened, as even more illegals started flooding across the southern border. We turn again to William Jasper of the New American Magazine. He has some important perspective about the supposed worth of any amnesty proposal.
We have no excuse for falling for another program of amnesty. We know the consequences. We've seen it many times. We have had many different amnesties already implemented in this country. We're told this is going to be a one-time thing. We have several million illegal aliens in this country who we should just give amnesty, let them become legalized, then they'll become productive citizens, they'll come out of the shadows, and everything will be wonderful. Well, we've done this time after time, and what we find out is that as soon as those people are legalized, those people who are here criminally are legalized, we see a chain migration. They bring in more family members, or it encourages people who are completely unrelated to them to come into the country. One amnesty begets another.
There's another serious side to the illegal immigration problem. Amnesty rallies frequently include displays with signs stating, "Today we march, tomorrow we vote." Occasionally, children of illegal immigrants show up wearing shirts or carrying signs that say, "Future voter." Eliseo Medina is an executive vice president of the huge Service Employees International Union, SEIU. He was quoted in a recent issue of Whistleblower magazine as follows: "Can you imagine 8 million new voters who care about our issues and will be voting? We will be creating a governing coalition for the long term, not just for an election cycle." Medina, himself an immigrant from Mexico, is also an honorary chairman of the Democratic Socialists of America, the U.S. arm of the Socialist International. The originators of the Socialist International were Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Leaders in the early 20th century included communist Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin. Gaining ballot position for the 8 million that would surely be influenced by men like Medina would dramatically shift leftward the election results in many parts of our nation. If this man gets his way, the Declaration of Independence will be canceled, the Constitution will become a quaint relic of past history, and the United States would become a mere part of a world government led by totalitarian socialists. When he served in the White House, President George W. Bush legitimized the use of Mexico's matricular consular identification cards for immigrants in America. These cards were then used by illegal immigrants to obtain driver's licenses, open bank accounts, and in some areas where scrutiny was lax, even register to vote. In 2008, career State Department Foreign Service officer David Simcox published a report claiming that at least 1.8 million and possibly as many as 2.7 million non-citizens had voted in the 2006 election. States most heavily affected by this growing corruption of the voting process include California, Florida, Texas, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, and Arizona. The already serious attack on the voting privilege will only get worse with amnesty. Again, we recommend enforcement of existing laws, including demonstration of citizenship as a requirement to cast a ballot. New amnesty proposals, if passed, will reward upwards of 11 million lawbreakers with the most coveted status in the world, free access to America and the road to full American citizenship. This would reduce to mockery the road traveled by so many who complied with our laws, entered our nation legally, stood in various lines, studied to pass citizenship tests, learned the English language, pledged to obey all of our nation's laws, and gratefully assimilated into the American system.
I now declare that each of you is a citizen of the United States.
Everyone knows that our nation is a nation made up almost entirely of immigrants. Either we ourselves or our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and others came here from elsewhere. None of them wanted anything more than to be free to work, to produce, to keep the fruits of their labor, and to pass on to children and grandchildren the wonderful system of limited government that has made our country the envy of the world. Our ancestors came here legally, quickly learned the language if they didn't already know it, adopted the American culture, and attained full citizenship. Our nation still welcomes 1 million legal immigrants every year, more than the rest of the world combined. But the invaders who have come here illegally are demanding the rights and privileges of citizenship while threatening to destroy the nation.
It's a time of war, and it's time to revolt, and it's good time.
Invaders are different and should be treated differently. President George Bush and other U.S. leaders, especially some corporate leaders, see the people of Mexico as a source of cheap labor or even a source of recruits for our thinly spread military. In March 2005, President Bush hosted a meeting near his Texas home attended by Mexico's president and Canada's prime minister. The three men launched the Security and Prosperity Partnership, a scheme to abolish the borders separating the three countries, leading to the formation of a regional government similar to the European Union. Ultimately, world government was their hidden goal. The leaders of the three countries have continued to meet every year. Their plan called for dealing with the illegal immigration problem by abolishing the borders. Their desire was to create a North American Union. Another part of the plan included construction of a massive highway system from southern Mexico through the United States and into Canada. The impetus for this revolutionary program came from the New York City-based Council on Foreign Relations. Let's go over a little bit of the history of this subversive proposal. In June 2005, a Council on Foreign Relations task force issued a document entitled Building a North American Community. It calls for a common border around the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. It seeks integration of Mexican and Canadian personnel into our nation's Department of Homeland Security. And it calls for migrant worker programs to be expanded so that any worker from each of these three countries can relocate to wherever he chooses. those 50 million people in Mexico would get their wish. This radical program received additional backing from Mr. Bush and his Mexican and Canadian counterparts when the three met in Cancun in March 2006. If these internationalist plans are implemented, we can kiss the U.S. Constitution goodbye, tear up the Declaration of Independence, and see America converted into a carbon copy of the many previous despotic regimes across the world. As a result of the massive campaign undertaken by the John Birch Society and allied groups, the Security and Prosperity Partnership has changed its name to the North American Leaders Summit, and the planned new massive highway has barely materialized. But agreements dealing with integration of banking, medical services, armed forces, environmental laws, energy policies, and more continue to be concluded. Uncontrolled immigration has destroyed nations in the past. It will destroy ours as well if we don't insist on enforcement of existing laws and rejection of amnesty. Citizenship in our wonderful country is a privilege. Those who are here illegally should be treated as lawbreakers and dealt with accordingly. All should be told about the proper way to enter our nation, and that it includes learning our language, understanding our governmental system, and happily assimilating, just as so many millions have gladly done in years past. We don't have to accept the invasion of our country by people from other countries. We don't have to lose our country to the internationalists who want to rule the world. We can force our leaders to do what is right for America, and we can even restore the Constitution to full force and effect, but only if we have the understanding and the determination to do so. Members of the John Birch Society are determined to do everything they can to preserve this nation, but help is needed, and we invite all who hear this program to contact us and get involved in the fight for America.